One type of person we should have on the core due diligence team should handle cultural issues. If you're dealing with a seller who's very different from yourself, they may be in a different country, they may be in an entirely different industry, they just may be very different. We do need someone on our side who thoroughly understands the other side and can explain to them what we want and try and keep everybody on the right wavelength. Because you can make very, very serious mistakes by jumping to conclusions. Obvious mistakes. There was a friend of mine who was doing a deal in Barcelona a couple of years ago in Spain, and he'd arranged to see the other side in the hotel at 8. He'd phoned them and they said, "See you in the hotel at 8." Now, being Northern European, he arrived bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, 8 o'clock in the morning. Nobody there. He had to kick his heels all day to wait for them to turn up at 8 o'clock in the evening. The idea of organising a serious business meeting in Barcelona at that time at 8 o'clock in the morning was a completely alien concept. But he jumped to the conclusion that see you at 8 means 8 o'clock in the morning. I had another experience, similar, where I was dealing I had a Dutch client who wanted to buy a cheese-making factory somewhere quite close to Milan in Italy. I didn't have to go to Italy because their bank was Credito Italiano in Moorgate in the city of London, which was about 5 minutes walk from my own office. I went to see the banker at Credito Italiano just to start the ball rolling, and I asked about the company. It seemed a sensible company, and I talked about the figures to a certain extent and the market and the competitors and so on. And then I said, well, I think my client certainly would be interested in this, but just to go through the procedure, we'd like obviously more information, we'd like an information memorandum, and then if we think we can take it one step further, we'd like to send in KPMG in Italy just to do an overview to give us a general view of the company before we go any further. To which the answer was, absolutely not. No, you can't do that. That's not how it works. So I said, well, how does it work? He said, well, what happens? You have to go to Milan to meet my client, and I'll give you a set of accounts before you go, and you'll then have dinner with my client, and if you get on during dinner, round about coffee time, he'll take out a set of the accounts and he'll write down in pencil on the side of the accounts the real accounts. And I said, that's very interesting, and I assumed they weren't paying the proper tax. And so I said, well, that's very interesting, and no doubt the real accounts will be better than the ordinary accounts, and so if we like those, we can then proceed and start our due diligence with KPMG. Absolutely not, he said. I said, all right, then you tell me what happens next. He said, well, my client will ring me, and if he reckons that you're the right sort of person to deal with, and therefore represent clients who are probably the right sort of people for him to deal with, then he'll say, this is the time for the second meeting. I said, I got to go to Milan again. Yes, you got to go to Milan again. Dinner, yes, dinner. And then at coffee, he said, he'll take up the set of accounts again, and he'll write down in pencil the real accounts. I said, well, that's very interesting indeed, and what are those? And he said, well, the company's making a great deal of money, and the internal family don't want the external family, the nephews and nieces and cousins and so on, to know quite how much they're making. So the real accounts are not disseminated very, very widely. And I said, well, that's absolutely excellent. It's even better company than I thought. Then can we ask KPMG to go and have a look? Absolutely not. I said, why not? He said, well, by that time, you'll know each other well, you'll like each other, and you'll trust each other, and the deal can sort of go ahead. I said, well, unfortunately, my clients in Holland, they won't go along with that. They need to do a proper due diligence. Now, I can see both sides of both views to a certain extent, but Northern Europe is very different to Southern Europe in these particular matters. And of course, in wider parts of the world, things are also very different. So we do need somebody who can handle the culture on on the deal if it's very different. You can make fundamental mistakes. Just there's a well-known story, just very briefly, on when ABN, a Dutch bank, merged with AMRO, a Dutch bank, to become ABN AMRO. Now those were two banks in the same country, Holland, with probably the very similar type of client list. They were one would think they were culturally extremely similar, but they were very different. And it was first noticed at the celebratory dinner both boards organised to get to know each other a bit better. Because being Dutch, and Dutch are very keen on keeping costs down. They have an expression, tall trees catch the wind, you cut everything that is out of line. And being that pedantic over costs, they'd agreed between themselves the maximum value of a present that any one director could give another director at this particular celebratory dinner. I can't remember the exact figure. It was all in guilders in those days rather than euros nowadays. But let's say it was 1250 guilders. It had been agreed that no present should be more than 1250 guilders. Now the people at AMRO thought that was really rather cheap, so they pushed it a bit, and they thought we could spend 25 guilders. And they turned up with fairly expensive boxes of chocolates. Now the guys on the ABN side, they thought 1250 euros meant 1250 euros, and they turned up with fairly expensive gold cufflinks. Two banks in the same country, but internally, culturally, completely different. So how we can get round this sort of problem is to not only have our own person on our team who understands the culture, but also to employ a local lawyer to explain to the seller exactly what type of due diligence we're going to do. On the Italian deal, had it gone ahead, had it been possible to get it off the starting blocks, I would have employed a lawyer in Milan, explained to him, if he didn't know already, what an Anglo-Saxon type due diligence was like, and explained to the other side, the cheese manufacturer, that it wasn't that we didn't trust him. It wasn't that we didn't take his word on various things. We just did that sort of due diligence. We had to do that sort of due diligence. It wasn't a personal slight on his character at all, and that probably would have brought us slightly closer together.